You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 124. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be meeting Eileen Ormsby, who is a dark webs expert and author of true crime books. Eileen's also a lawyer, an author, and freelance journalist based in Melbourne, Australia. Her first book, Silk Road, was the world's first in-depth expose of the black markets that operate on the dark web. She's now a leading dark webs expert, sought after by television programs like 48 Hours. Her gonzo-style investigations have led her deep into the secretive corners of the dark web, where drugs, weapon dealers, hackers, hitmen, and worse ply their trade. Little Lost Girl is her latest true crime book, and it's out now, so we're going to talk to her about that and her work. I'm a big fan of true crime, and I have been wanting to have a true crime author on the podcast for a while. So I was excited that Eileen agreed to be my first true crime nonfiction author here on the show. So we'll be talking to her here in a second, so stay tuned for that. Quick reminder, please visit thrillerauthors.com. You can access the show notes there for this episode and have access to my archive of over 120 author interviews. And please do visit thrillingreads.com/rate to rate and review this podcast. Please note, due to the graphic nature of true crime, listener discretion is advised. Hey everybody, this is Alan with Meet the Thriller Author. And on the podcast for today, I have Eileen Ormsby, who is a dark webs expert and author of true crime books. Little Girls Lost is the latest in her dark webs true crime books. And I'm a big fan of true crime, and so I've been wanting to have a true crime author on the podcast. So I'm really excited to have Eileen here. You're all the way from Australia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Alan?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, very excited to be here.
Yeah, and I guess the first I guess nonfiction that I've had author that I've had on.
Oh, okay.
So
I feel honored.
Yeah. So how did you get into writing true crime? Can you tell us your story?
Sure. Well, it really started back in 2012 when I was a freelance journalist, and I started writing about the dark web, and I wrote about the Silk Road online marketplace, and that was the first of the large point-and-click marketplaces on the dark web where you could buy and sell any drug imaginable. And I'd sort of looked into it. It was still in its early days then, and I'd spoken to the owner and some of the people that used it and wrote about it for a newspaper here in Melbourne. And my editor immediately asked me to write some more stories about the dark web because at that time nobody had heard about it. And so from then on, I pretty much started spending a little bit of every day inside the dark web, talking to all the people that populated the place, finding out why they were there, what they were doing, having a look at what was going on there, and kept on writing it for my editor. And then, of course, the next thing happened as I decided to pitch a book, and I got a book deal, my first book deal, which was Silk Road. And from then on, it's just carried on. It's been my thing to be the dark web expert, I guess.
Yeah, Silk Road. I remember that the founder of that was it Ross Ulbright, I think.
Ross Ulbright.
He was arrested like a few miles from where I live in the library there. So I remember.
Of course, he would have been in the library, the science fiction section of the Glen Park Library, I think it was.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's about 2-3 miles from where I live. So now whenever I drive by that library, I think about that, and it's so interesting. Yeah. So I haven't been into the dark web. So can you tell us about it? And is it as seedy and creepy as it's made out to be in the media? I mean, give us a little tour of it?
Yes and no. So the dark web is just the name that we give to the group of websites that you can't find using Google or any of your normal search engines. In fact, you can't find it unless you download special software in order to actually get into it. And you know that you're looking for a dark web website when instead of at the end of the URL of the web address, instead of got .com or .org or .net or any of the normal signifiers that you know of, it says .onion. And what will happen if you put that URL with the .onion at the end into your normal web browser, into Chrome or Safari or Firefox, it will just come back, page not found, this does not exist. But when you download the special software, which is a darknet called Tor, once you plug that into the browser that opens up there, you will in fact be able to open that website. And what they are is the Tor provides these layers of encryption, which mean that both the website owner, the host, and the visitor to the website are completely hidden from each other. Neither can find out who the other is. Conjunction with the US Navy in order to protect military secrets. And the whole idea was that it would be, unbreakable encryption, so that especially agents in hostile regimes could talk to each other. Operatives in hostile regimes could talk to each other without their communications being intercepted. But those same technologies provide a perfect place for crime to happen as well, because obviously criminals also don't want to be detected. And it went fairly under the radar until Silk Road came along. So Silk Road started in 2011, and the idea was that it was a complete open marketplace where willing sellers and willing buyers could come together, meet each other in this marketplace and buy from each other. And the idea was that it was to sell drugs, and it was to operate on the same sort of platform as any other e-commerce platform. So it looks like eBay or Amazon when you go in there. And what happens is you browse the drugs that you're interested in, you pop them into a basket, you pay with Bitcoin, but instead of paying the seller, you're actually paying the site, and the site holds the Bitcoin in escrow until you release it. So you say, yes, I've received the drugs, they're what they were supposed to be, they're the right amount, and so you can now release the money to the seller, and then the site keeps a small percentage of that for doing that. So it operated just like any other online buying and selling place operates, except instead of buying and selling books or CDs or DVDs or whatever, you're actually buying and selling drugs. And it was any drug imaginable. And it became huge. It became, a multi-million-dollar, billion-dollar industry, and it's still going, even though Silk Road was shut down. So that ran for about 2.5 years until, as you say, it was the founder, Ross Ulbricht, was discovered and it was shut down. But since then, the sites that have popped up have been bigger than that one ever was. And so there's still a lot of commerce going on, a lot of drug buying going on the dark web today. And in fact, it's growing all the time, according to the Global Drugs Survey. And that's not the only thing you can find on the dark web. There are other things, but it is mostly used for buying and selling drugs, buying and selling hacking tools. And so it is a place for hackers to go and meet each other, to sell the dumps of the databases that they hack and that sort of thing. And then the really seedy place that you've heard of course, it is also the perfect place for child predator communities to get together and to share their materials, so their videos and photos.
Yeah, that was that part was really disturbing when I was doing my research for this. Had some, well, we always know there's always been sick, twisted people out there, but it's kind of shocking. I was reading that one. I think it was Matthew. He's Australian, I think. I can't remember his name, but he was basically creating for all these child abuse. It's just crazy.
Yeah, Matthew Graham created a site called Hurt to the Core, which is, so you've got a lot of pedophile networks on the dark web, but even most pedophiles said, no, this site is the worst site that's ever existed. We don't want anything to do with it. And the law enforcement also said this was the worst site in history, because it wasn't, and I shouldn't say just or merely child pornography. There was nothing merely about it, but this was the worst of the worst. This was actual torture, child torture. And so, yeah, that existed in the dark web. It has been shut down, but that little subset of pedophilia called hurtcore still exists to some extent on the dark web.
And I also saw that you had your story was so fascinating with that. I believe it was the Visa Mafia website that was in the dark web, which I guess was supposedly where you could hire a hitman, but it was kind of a con. That's a fascinating story.
Yeah, well, there's always been hitman sites on the dark web. They've always advertised their wares and said, "Oh, no, it's a perfect place for a hitman." And the idea was that, you could hire someone on. You didn't have to know who they were. They didn't have to know who you were. All you had to do was pay them Bitcoin, give them a photo of the person that you wanted killed, and it would all happen. You'd never have to meet each other. And it sounded great in theory, but of course, once you've handed over your Bitcoin to someone who you don't know, once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. And so they have absolutely no incentive whatsoever to carry out the murder. So this guy was running this site, and he ran a very slick site. It had really good graphics, and it was good interface. It was very professional. And he actually had hundreds of thousands of dollars come in Bitcoin of people that were trying to order hits, except he was just scamming every one of them. He was like a Nigerian scammer. So every time they'd ask, when's my hit being carried out? He'd say, there's something went wrong. The hitman needs a bit more money or this and that. And he'd keep on fleecing them for more and more money until they finally realised it was a scam and gave up. And so I was writing about it and saying, this site, all hitmen sites are scams, and this one included. And if you give them money, you're going to lose it. And he started writing to me and saying, look, stop writing about my site. You're first of all, he was trying to tell me he was a real hitman site. He was going to send his hitmen after me, and if I didn't stop writing about it. But then he eventually started saying, look, please stop writing about my site, because what I'm doing is a good thing. I am scamming would-be murderers out of their money, and all you're doing is hurting my business. Please stop doing it. And then he even offered me a job to help him rewrite his site because English was his second language, and we sort of got to know each other in a little way. But the thing was, even though he was scamming people, there were very real people ordering very real murders. So those people were quite dangerous. And I think it was 2016, a friendly provided access to a cybersecurity expert in London called Chris Montero, access to the Visa Mafia site. I'd managed to crack their crazy password, which was fucked. That was his actual password, and got into all the emails, and we were able to, and he contacted me and said, here, have a look at this, and we were able to actually see every single email that had come and gone, every piece of Bitcoin that had been transferred into the account, all the hits that had been carried out. And with that, knowing that there were real people that had hits taken out on them, even though they weren't in danger from this site, had to start telling law enforcement. And you'd think that would be fairly easy, wouldn't you? But no, law enforcement, when they start having this, journalists from Australia and this somewhat eccentric cybersecurity guy from London trying to ring up and say, dark web, hitmen, people were having, they were like, no, you guys are crazy, just leave us alone. And we really couldn't get them to take it seriously until one of the people on that list that had a hit taken out against them ended up with a bullet in her head. And her name was Amy Allwine in Minnesota there. And then they really started taking it seriously because her name, her details were in this list of things that we had handed over to the FBI. And to their credit, they had actually gone and seen her and said, hey, your name's on this dark website. Do you know anyone that might have paid $13,000 to carry out a hit on you? And she was like, no, I've got no idea. And they were like, oh, well, keep an eye out, be safe. And then she wound up dead. And of course, they scrambled after that to have a look at everybody on this list. And her husband was caught for that one and is now in prison. But,
that's crazy.
Until then, they were really not taking it seriously at all.
Wow! So did you know if any other of these people that out these hits were there any arrests at all, or from the other one?
There were loads more arrests.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, no. After that, there were many more arrests. We also worked with CBS over there for their 48 Hours program, and during that, I was still talking to the owner of Visa Mafia Europe. He said, "Oh, look, I'll come onto the show," because he actually thought it was a chance to advertise his hitman site, and he provided them personally with two of the new names and addresses and photos of people that had hits taken out on them, and they turned out to be real as well. And two people got arrested over those. So, he was actually supplying 48 Hours with some of the information about these people. But then when they released it and said, "Oh, this site's a scam," he got all upset and wouldn't come.
Wow, that's just incredible. And so now you're writing your books now from based on some of these cases that you've investigated. And is your latest book, is that Little Girl's Lost? Is that the latest one?
That's the latest one, but that's not actually dark web related. So I do write regular true crime as well.
Oh, okay.
So it's a bit confusing because my own imprint is the dark web's true crime, but it is about all sorts of different crimes. So I've got 3 books specifically on the dark web, which are Silk Road, The Darkest Web, and Murder on the Dark Web. And then I've got 3 books that are on general sort of crimes, though most of the crimes that I write about do have some sort of internet aspect to them.
And so now, were you like, before you started writing these books and everything, were you a fan of true crime, or did that come later? Because you were like, your background is very different, right? You were like an attorney, I believe.
Yeah, well, I was a corporate lawyer, so that really had nothing to do with true crime whatsoever, except unless you say, at the I was working for the banks and the bad guys, I guess, when the global financial crisis hit in 2008, and that sort of gave me an existential crisis, and said, I don't want to do this anymore. People are losing their homes, and I'm helping protect the people with all the money, and so that's when I quit to become a writer. That's when I began journalism and writing books. So first of all, I wrote a chick lit comedy novel, which never went anywhere. It never got picked up by a publisher, but my first true crime book got picked up by a publisher and sort of rolled on from there.
And I found out also that you're one of the writers for the Case File podcast, which is a podcast that I've listened to before. It's very interesting cases on there. I'm
a freelance writer for them, so I've written about a dozen, and that's basically what the books that are under my own imprint, the Dark Web's True Crime series, are all extended versions of those scripts that I wrote for Case File.
Oh, that's fascinating. So how do you even, I guess I never really realized with the podcast scripting, I guess, how, is it a big difference from writing a script for a podcast that someone's going to read compared to a book? What's that process like for you?
It is a little bit. I mean, I write them as if they're going to be a book almost, or as if they're going to be an article, but then I tweak it so that it is more suitable for being read out. But then it also goes to an editor at Case File who will edit it for the final reading out by the host. So it's similar, and that's why there is a bit of difference between the books and the Case File episodes, is because they are more edited for the speech, but the research and everything like that is exactly the same.
And so then, what I always like to ask my guests about the tools that they use. So what do you use to write these scripts in your books? Is it Word, or use a software like Scrivener? Or
I'm a Scrivener fan. I couldn't live without Scrivener. And I'm more than happy to give them a free shout out, because it is amazing software, very, very, very affordable, and I'm not on their payroll. I just absolutely love it.
Yeah, no, I'm a big. I use Scrivener as well too, and yeah, I love that software, and I like that it's not a subscription based.
Yeah, that's right. It was like a one-time payment, and it's more than paid for itself.
So now you come across so much disturbing stuff, when you're doing when you're writing. Does that ever get to you at all, or how do you deal with that?
Well, most of the time I stay away from the really disturbing stuff. So, I don't have a problem with going into the drugs markets and talking to the drug dealers and all that sort of thing. I am against I'll get a bit political here, but I'm against the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. And I think that, drugs should be legalized, regulated. They should be a health problem, not a law and order problem. And so the whole idea of the drugs markets online, in some ways, they're providing a safer place for people who are going to buy drugs anyway to buy their drugs. They don't have to come face to face with, most people that buy the drugs are not criminals in any other way other than the fact that they're buying drugs. And so this way, they don't have to come face to face with any drug dealers or anything like that. It's all, there's no violence involved. It's all done from the safety of their own homes. So, and there's all the feedback and quality control online as well. So like any other online sellers, they live and die by their feedback. So they're always searching for that 5 out of 5 feedback. And that means that they provide higher quality stuff. And it's also, there's other people on there that are independently testing different vendors' gear and all that sort of thing. So that overall, obviously doing drugs is never safe, but this way is safer than buying off the street in general. So in that, and they tend to be very reasonable, nice people that I speak to in that way. The only time I got really disturbed was when I was writing The Darkest Web, which is the second book. I did write about the hurt core sites and those sorts of things. And I never went and viewed any videos or photos because I knew that once you see that, you can't unsee it. Not to mention that it's very illegal. But I did not want to see any of that stuff. But I did go into the forums, the discussion forums, where they get together and they talk about where they can find those things. They talk about actually abusing children and different methods for keeping them quiet and making them not remember and all those sorts of things. So that was very disturbing. And then I also went to some of the trials, including Matthew Graham, who you mentioned earlier, who owned Hurt to the Core. And that was just 2 days of really, really disturbing stuff being read out because they were reading out sort of scene by scene of these videos that he'd hosted and exactly what was in photos and discussions between him and the carrying out the torture and that sort of thing. So that was, I really went home in tears every night of that thing. It was just horrific. But that's sort of, I'll put that behind me and try not to think about that so much anymore.
Yeah, I read one of those articles on his trial, and it had some. This is just on a regular website, just covering the trial, and just a couple instances in there. I couldn't believe it when I was reading. So yeah, I can't even imagine. Good thing that they got him, at least one of them, at least for now.
Well, that's right. And I mean, there's still fallout from that now because I mean, he was not a contact offender. There was no evidence that he'd ever actually touched any children. He ran this site for other people. But now they have been able to sort of get into some of the videos and photos and start finding people from those. I mean, there's no crack cyber team working on this. It's old-fashioned detective work where they look at the videos and the photos, they sort of find a freckle on someone's finger or some sort of evidence that they can figure out where in the world it might be and who the child might be, and then they find the perpetrators that way. But I don't envy the police that have to go through all those materials in order to find those people.
Yeah. I watched that. There was I think it was the 60 Minutes, Australian 60 Minutes, on the guy in the Philippines that was doing that. And yeah, the way that was what a vile human. But anyway, that's
he's probably the worst of the worst, really. I mean, there's some bad people out there. He's at the top of the list.
Yeah, but it was from a crime perspective, for police procedural, like you said, it's just unbelievable. These guys and women, these police and law enforcement people are really doing it old school.
They go undercover, they talk to these people, try to get them to give up any information, get them to trust them. So I can't imagine what that does to your psyche.
Yeah, because that's the thing with that the dark web, right? That you were saying before, is that it really is untraceable than like the regular web is.
Well, it's untraceable if you do everything right, but there is no human being that does everything right.
Got it.
In fact, in the hackers, you'll always find there's a saying amongst the hackers that it's way easier to hack a person than it is to hack a computer. Mm. And the way most of them get their really big breaks is literally by social engineering, by talking someone into giving up their password, pretending to be someone important that they have to give their password to or whatever. And that's what most hacking is all about, rather than lots of tapping on a computer and then I'm in, like you see on CSI or something like that.
And what is your writing process like then? I'm so curious because coming from the fiction world, what's your writing process for nonfiction? I mean, do you have these outlines? Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, well, I've got this master list of crimes I'd be interested in writing about. So nowadays, mostly, my thing is I write a case file episode, a few case file episodes, and put them together in a book. So I have this master list of cases I'd like to cover, and I'm constantly adding to that. So anytime I see something interesting on Reddit or on Twitter or anywhere like that, of a case that sounds like it could be interesting, I'll put it in the master file. And then I'll choose which one's going to go next and see how much meat it's got in it. And then I basically, from there, I create a script in a file. I read everything I possibly can about it. I watch everything I possibly can about it. Depending on whether it's appropriate or not, I'll interview people and I'll I'll actually go to trials or visit people and so on. That's not always appropriate for different reasons. And then once I've got every bit of research I possibly can have, I think of my narrative structure. So I try to write them. So if you listen to the case files, they're not like ordinary podcasts in a way, because they are literally like a short spoken, like a short audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a narrative structure the same as any fiction. Obviously, everything has to be true and real in it, but I try to give it that same sort of narrative structure, a 3-act structure. So I have to figure out, put it in chapters and figure out how that it's going to sound interesting. I'm going to make people's interest because they are quite lengthy.
Yeah, that's what I enjoy about that one too. That I enjoy the other serial, like the scripted one with all the interviews, spliced in and everything. But those get a little bit too much. It is kind of nice just to listen to someone just tell you what the case without so much production.
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's popular, is because it is pretty much a free audio book for people listening.
Yeah.
Because each one goes for an hour and a half, 2 hours. So it's like listening to a short audio book.
And so has with everything that's been going on this year, the craziness with the pandemic, has that changed the way you do your work, or has it affected you at all?
Not really. It's meant I haven't been able to travel to interview people or see places as much anymore. One of my favourite things that I own is an Oculus Go VR headset.
Oh yeah.
And so that way I can actually visit certain locations in the VR and walk around them, because they have Google Maps in full VR in there.
Mm-hmm.
So I do that instead of going out. But as far as personally, I've always worked from home, and I'm a bit of an introvert anyway, so it hasn't affected me too badly.
Okay, so what are you working on now? What's next for you?
I've got another case file podcast to come out. I have started putting together a sort of a complete encyclopedia of the dark web, which once I've got a bit of that underway, I'll start pitching that I'll give it to my agent to pitch to publishers. But I haven't got as far as getting that pitch in yet. So yeah, and I've got another indie published book to come out. The case file compilation's coming out fairly soon. So it's all those sorts of things working together. I try to put as much time into each one as I can.
And the best place for listeners to find you would be on your website. You have a lot of great info on your website.
Mostly I'm on Twitter at Eileen Ormsby, and anything that I do could sort of be linked there. I've got a blog at allthingsvice.com, or if you just Google my name, you'll come up with all my books.
Yeah, your blog cracked me up, because your contact info, when I was trying to find out how to contact you to ask you to be on the podcast, it was like basically like regular email, and then for like all the paranoid, it was like
yeah, I've got an encrypted email and a regular email. That's right. And then people send me like encrypted messages to the encrypted email. Sometimes it's very secret squirrel.
Oh, that's crazy. So that's kind of funny. But and so before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests for advice, because a lot of the listeners are also aspiring writers. Any advice for like an aspiring true crime writer out there?
Oh, well, I guess the main thing about being a true crime writer is you have to be accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Because people will jump all over you if you get anything wrong. So research is the main thing for that. And then, try to, if you're writing it for a book, or try to give it that same narrative structure as you would for your fiction, without compromising your accuracy. That's the big challenge.
Okay, all right, Eileen. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you about your work.
Thanks very much for having me, Ellen. It was really great.
Thanks for listening to the Meet the Thriller Author podcast. Be sure to visit thrillerauthors.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover great thrilling reads. If you enjoy the podcast, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review to it, wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast, be it iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, wherever it is that you're listening to this right now. I would appreciate it. And please do check out my own thriller novels over at my website at alanpeterson.com. Until next time.